Hi, Mickey.
Hey, Bob.
How you doing?
I'm doing fine.
Good. Big day for you.
Why is that?
It was kind of a crossover day for you. You kind of broke through from the blogosphere to the MSM with that business page piece in the New York Times. It's following your lead. You know, you've been using your blog Cows Files to mercilessly persecute Howard Kurtz, the media critic for the Washington Post, for years, and they finally picked up on it.
That's all your fault, Bob.
How do you figure?
I got into a tussle with Kurtz when I linked to your book Non-Zero on Amazon. And I was in this Amazon Associates program that kicks back 5% of the proceeds to the person who links.
Oh, then you're a rich man by now, I guess,
and
huh?
two people bought your book, and I got a kickback of $1.83. And I talked to Kurtz, and we both said it's interesting. This has the potential for being a conflict of interest, because if I cite your book, then I get money back, and I'll obviously, that encourages me to say nice things about your book. So he writes this sleazy little item that implies that I'm ethically challenged because
so that's the beginning of all this?
This problem that I acknowledged on my website, and that it had the grand total of $1.83, and then he did a correction and he screwed up the correction. So I said, everybody sucks up to Howie Kurtz because they're scared of him. This wipes that out. I'm going to just say what I think. And I was echoing others who point out he writes about CNN and he works for CNN. CNN made him famous. There's a limit to how much he can blast CNN. CNN has him by the balls.
Well,
so why not say that?
As Johnny Carson used to say, I did not know that. I did not know that I was the origin of this. And it's kind of really large-minded of you to admit to everyone in the world that really what seemed like high-minded criticism on your part is just a petty grievance filtering through the reptilian core of your brain and out into the blogosphere.
Well, first, nobody's watching this. It's not like we're putting this on the web.
I wouldn't say nobody. I mean, our figures are confidential. We're not going to get into details. But it's more than zero.
Okay. The second thing is, I claim all the tiff with Kurtz did was move the needle back to neutral. In other words, before I'd wanted to write about this, but was worried, hey, I don't want to annoy Howie Kurtz because he could help me, and I think that's what protects him.
Yeah.
And this sort of wiped that out and let me actually say what I think. I attack a lot of the other people where it's not like an earth-shaking issue. I mean, Chris Bangle, the stylist of BMW, it doesn't really matter if BMWs are ugly or not, but it's fun to attack him because he's a huge, slow-moving, profusely bleeding target.
Well, anyway,
the same with Kurtz.
Anyway, here's the I'm holding up the piece here that it's journalist cover thyself. The phrase conflict questions, meaning conflict of interest, is in the subhead. It quotes you, calls you a frequent critic of Mr. Kurtz, which is kind of like calling Ted Bundy a frequent critic of young women or something. But anyway, that's good. Congratulations.
Thank you. The story was sort of a little wishy-washy, and she didn't use "they have him by the balls" quote.
Well, I think I know why.
Well, she said
it's a respectable media outlet.
She said right away, "Can you rephrase that for a family paper?"
And you refused on principle.
What?
You refused on principle?
No, I failed on account of stupidity. I couldn't think of a better way to put it.
Yeah.
So it didn't make it in.
Well, and you maintain that you have no conflicts, even though you write about the Washington Post for a blog on Slate, which is now owned by the Washington Post?
Good point. I don't claim I have no conflicts. I endorse the Michael Kinsley paradigm, which is it's a conflict of interest for a mother to have two children. There's no reason not to have two children. Everybody has conflicts. You deal with them all the time. There are a couple problems with Kurtz. First, everybody has a conflict with the company. Every reporter has a conflict with the company that employs them. So I have a conflict in attacking the Washington Post, although I try to do it. It has never been a problem. But Kurtz has a gratuitous second conflict, which he's gone and hired himself out to the very company he's assigned by the Washington Post to report on.
One of many companies. I mean, it seems to me the problem is that if a media critic writes about the paper they work for, it's clear to everybody there's a conflict, whereas when he writes for CNN, it's not clear because a lot of people may not know that he's on the show. But by the same token, most people don't know the Washington Post owns Slate. So when you write about Slate, the Washington Post...
Well, it's a good point. I probably should say that I should disclose that the Washington Post owns Slate.
Yeah, maybe...
But in this case, when I'm attacking them, it's not... such a sin. If I were sucking up to them, that would be different.
Well, anyway, I've started the ball rolling, and if the Times ever does do a piece on your conflict of interest, they'll have to quote me as a frequent House critic.
The other thing is, Kurtz runs around. Kurtz's métier is attacking other journalists for conflicts of interest, like an East German figure skating judge, as Franklin Foer put it, while he has the biggest conflict of interest of anybody. So I call him a hypocrite.
It says in this piece that he's writing a novel that's a satire on the media business. Now, Mickey, when people write books like this, they often settle scores. They have thinly veiled versions of real-life characters who have been getting on their nerves for years.
He would never...
Yeah?
He would never do me that favor.
You don't think so? You don't anticipate that there might be a character named not Mickey Kaus, but, say, Mickey Mouse?
Like Donald Duck? No, I don't think so.
Author of Mouse Files?
I don't think so, because his official stance is that I have no impact on him at all. He's pleased to read me, and there, Mickey. So I wish I could be the Antichrist in one of his books, but I
never know.
Yeah.
So what in the world of actual significance is going on?
There's a big development in Israel. I know very little about Israel. I made it through 4 years of the New Republic by half intentionally not knowing enough about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to write an editorial, so they never had to ask me.
I actually went to Israel on the New Republic's dime when I was there, so I'm a noted authority.
Well, cool. So this looks like what's happened is Sharon has dissolved the government, left the Likud party, founding his own centrist party, might get some people from Labor to join in with the stated purpose of doing a deal with the Palestinians, even if it involves some unilateral withdrawals, and redrawing Israel's borders to a more defensible position and following the roadmap to a Palestinian state. What's wrong with that?
Well, right-minded people are indeed applauding it. Yossi Beil, a right-minded Israeli politician, seemed upbeat about this development. And Tom Friedman actually wrote a column a couple of months ago anticipating that there might be a split between Sharon and Likud, and saying it would be a good thing because the right-wing crazies in Likud could then drive themselves off a cliff, and Sharon would be free to pursue real peace with moderates and people to his left. I'm not so optimistic. In fact, I think I can prove to you with nearly mathematical rigor that Sharon is not well equipped to usher in a lasting peace, if you're ready for this.
I'm ready.
Okay. His last big initiative was the Gaza withdrawal.
Right.
And the problem with it was, and I think Tom Friedman actually noted this at the time, many months ago, the problem with it was that it was unilateral. If he had made it at least seem to be the product of negotiation with Mahmoud Abbas, then Abbas would have gotten credit for it within the Palestinian community. And I think the Friedman column said this many, many months ago. As it happened, Hamas was able to take a lot of the credit among Palestinians precisely because the withdrawal was unilateral, and so they could say, well, Israel was chased out of Gaza by the terrorist strikes, although, of course, they don't use the word terrorist to apply to themselves. So that was, I just think, a clear-cut blunder, and it's hard to explain it because, you can't explain it in terms of domestic political constraints, because the flack that Sharon took from his right was actually precisely this. Bibi Netanyahu said, you should have gotten something in return. That was his complaint. Now, of course, Netanyahu wasn't thinking in the terms I've just laid out. Netanyahu was, he was just trying to find something to whine about, actually. He's just an opportunist. But his point was, we should have gotten something for this. So he was actually favoring a negotiated withdrawal from Gaza. So it wasn't a domestic a political problem. It clearly would have helped the Palestinian Authority consolidate power on the other side, which you would think would be good, since Sharon professes to not like the amount of power that Hamas and other radical groups hold on that side. So, I mean, here's my question is, can you explain what Sharon did in some terms that don't imply that he's ill-equipped to lead Israel the rest of the way? I mean, either he's incompetent or he, at some level, I mean, there's also the cynical interpretation. Maybe he doesn't really want peace. Maybe that's not what's best for him politically or something.
You're coming out foursquare in favor of a charade negotiation with the Palestinians where they would get less than they got through Sharon's unilateral withdrawal. But
who would get less?
Well, if they negotiated with the Palestinians with the basis, the starting point being what Sharon did, the negotiation is going to go more in...
no, the starting point isn't what Sharon did. The point is that what Sharon did should have itself been the product of negotiation, even if they were a little bit of a charade. He should have gotten together with Abbas and met and emerged from the meeting and said, okay, I'm now convinced we can withdraw from Gaza. That would have empowered Abbas on the other side.
What?
I'm not saying he should have negotiated something else after deciding to withdraw from Gaza. I'm saying that should have been cast as a negotiated deal.
Well, you know more than I do. You could be right. It's hard for me to swallow this idea that the Palestinian attitude of "How dare you give us what we want? We wanted to wring it out of you." Sharon was scared of the demographic bomb. The borders were indefensible. The Palestinians could say, well, our superior numbers gave us this victory. Why can't they say that?
Well, look, they have two things they can say. They can say they were scared out of Gaza by the terrorism, or they can say the Palestinian Authority convinced them to do this. The two options on the Palestinian side are either give credit to the radicals or give credit to the government. He did it in a way that gave the credit to the radicals. It's totally straightforward. I haven't heard anybody contest this. I mean, I haven't heard it discussed as much as it should be, but it's just, I think Friedman made this point right after they said it was going to be unilateral.
No, I'm not contesting it. I'm allergic to solutions that require, hey, let's take this straightforward thing and make it a duplicitous charade. That's all. But sometimes that's important. I agree.
I would say in the diplomacy business, appearances are considered important. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I defer to you.
Thank you.
There have been a couple of Iraq developments. The most important of which I think is that many Democrats, including Bill Clinton and Joe Klein, who's about the most vehement war opponent that I know, have backed off of this headlong stampede toward a precipitous withdrawal. Clinton gave some very sensible remarks in New York yesterday, and Joe Klein wrote a column saying, hey, wait, maybe we should think twice before cutting and running. I think this is a salutary development. Also, Nancy Pelosi put off a vote in the Democratic caucus on a Murtha-like plan because the Democrats are thinking, well, wait, if we have an election on Bush's incompetence, we're going to win. If we have an election on should we cut and run in Iraq or stick around in Iraq, they might win. So maybe they prefer to be on the former playing field. So I think these Democratic second thoughts are a good thing.
Because you're against cutting and running.
I'm very much against cutting and running. Look.
Yeah, no, I'm not. I mean, as I've said, I think you got to just wait and see what happens in the elections. I mean, the landscape will be cast in a new light after that, and there's no point in deciding anything. They're what, like a couple of weeks away.
And the idea that a maelstrom of criticism of what a disaster the Iraq War doesn't affect the morale of the troops is insane. Of course it does.
Yeah, but Mick, are you saying we should all tailor our expression of opinion to that end? that once somebody's gotten us into what we consider a stupid war, we shouldn't mention it because it might offend the troops?
No, it's not you shouldn't mention it, but you shouldn't talk about withdrawal. Just as in the...
Well, wait
this
a
is
second.
This is a case
I mean,
where...
how does you would admit that there are some times when withdrawal makes sense in a military situation.
I agree.
How does a democratic country come to realize that time has arrived if nobody's allowed to say, let's withdraw?
No, I phrased it wrong. I'm not saying that people shouldn't be allowed to talk. I'm saying that if we decide to withdraw, that weakens our bargaining position in Iraq, and it makes it more likely that the insurgents are going to win. And that's a bad thing.
That's a bad thing.
And if you don't want the
I think
insurgents
only
to
a stupid
win,
president
maybe
would
you
get
should
us
think
to
twice about it.
To a situation like that to begin with. And by the way, Dick Cheney's sounding a little more liberal-minded than you these days. In his little talk yesterday, when he said it is legitimate, or Murtha's plan is a legitimate subject of discussion.
I wasn't saying it's illegitimate. I'm saying it does just hurt morale.
Yeah,
legitimate speech hurts morale. I mean, you just don't deny it. It's a trade-off.
Yeah, no. There are plenty of trade-offs that Bush has put us in the middle of here, and I didn't. But Cheney, what he said was illegitimate was to suggest, and he used the word suggest, was to suggest that Bush or anyone in the administration misled us into the war. That seems to me quite a statement, to say that it's illegitimate to suggest that you're not allowed to express the opinion. That's outside of the realm of legitimate discourse. I mean, we're always happy when Dick Cheney, the arbiter of legitimacy in discourse, lays down the lines clearly so that none of us transgress. But that seems to me. Do you think that's true? It's illegitimate to suggest it if you're of the opinion?
I think it's wrong of Cheney and very stupid of Cheney to say that. I don't know why they are clinging to this idea where we can dismiss people who question our methods out of hand. Why they're clinging to that strategy? It's not going to work, and it's also very retrospective. It's as if it's not going to build support for the war to engage in this historic debate over who misled whom, or whether it's legitimate or illegitimate to accuse somebody of misleading somebody.
Well,
the focus should be on that we can get a good result in Iraq, and we should get it, and then we can fire all the people who got us into the mess if it was a mistake.
That would be nice. They haven't all been fired yet.
Some have.
Not enough, and the ones who have left have mostly gone on to pretty glamorous positions or gotten medals of freedom.
I haven't seen a medal of freedom for Douglas Feith.
No, he's the one guy. But the mistakes went up a lot higher than him.
Fair enough.
Don Rumsfeld is an obvious candidate.
Fair enough, and I think the administration did obviously, want to present the most pro-war face, and it involved at some level misleading people. I mean, of course.
Yeah. So we agree.
This will show whether we can have one of these dialogues when we're both in a really pissy mood.
Yeah, and I think we've established that we can have a dialogue. The question is, will anyone find it interesting?
I turned out to be grouchier than you.
No, I feel grouchier than you sound, actually.
Okay, well,
maybe we should take this discussion offline.
I don't think we should leave on an up note when we can leave on a down note, but okay. Fair enough.